If someone said to you, I have one insight for you that will absolutely revolutionize your ability to quickly and clearly identify false statements and false philosophies when you hear them that permeate our culture, would you be interested? The Roadrunner tactic is how you do that. If Geisler and Turek had to pick just one thinking ability as the most valuable thinking ability, it would be how to verify and refute self-defeating statements. A self-defeating statement is one that fails to meet its own standard. For example, if someone says there is no absolute truth, that would be a self-defeating statement because they are claiming that there is no absolute truth is absolutely true. The one who's saying that there is no absolutely true is claiming that there is no absolutely true. That is an absolutely true statement that they think that they're making. They think that to say there is no absolute truth is absolutely true. Therefore, that is circular reasoning, the Roadrunner tactic. The preceding example is an example of the Roadrunner tactic because it reminds us that of Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, the old Saturday morning cartoon that many of us in my generation grew up watching. Coyote's goal was to catch the Roadrunner. Just when Coyote seemed to have the advantage against Roadrunner, Roadrunner always made Coyote crash. Roadrunner tactic helps relativists and postmodernists of our day realize that their arguments cannot sustain their own weight. Right, just like every other tactic that Wile E. Coyote tried to employ against Roadrunner, he had all these tactics, but none of them ever worked. So relativists and postmodernists crash like Coyote. The Roadrunner tactic is especially needed in colleges because many university professors tell students that there is no absolute truth at those universities. What's funny is that this means that all parents all over the world are literally paying, all parents who send their kids to college all over the world are literally paying thousands of dollars in college tuition so their children can be taught the truth that there is no truth. Ironic. They're likewise taught additional absurdities such as all truth is relative. In response to this, they should respond, is that a relative truth? Is it a relative truth that all truth is relative? Or are you making an absolute truth claim when you say that all truth is relative? There are no absolutes? Really? Is that absolutely true? That there are no absolutes? Are you absolutely sure there are no absolutes? It's true for you, but not for me? Well, is that statement true for you, or is it true for everyone? True for you, but not for me may be the mantra of our day, but it's not how the world really works. What would happen if you tried "it's true for you, but not for me" on a police officer who pulled you over and accused you of going 75 and a 40? Well, officer, that's true for you, but not for me. You'd be yanked out of that car and handcuffed to the back of the car and thrown in the back faster than you could get the words out of your mouth. Modern mantras such as all truth is relative, there are no absolutes, or it's true for you, but not for me, are false because they're self-defeating. More question. If there really is no truth, then why do we try to learn anything if there's no truth? If there's no truth, what's the point of trying to learn anything? Why should any student listen to any professor since the professor doesn't have the truth? If all truth is relative, then what's the point of the professor trying to convince the student of anything? Because what's true for the professor might not be true for the student. Why go to school and pay thousands of dollars for it if everything learned there is relative? Ideas have consequences, good ideas have good consequences, but bad ideas have bad consequences. If students learn the wrong idea about absolute right and wrong, why are we so surprised at those who lead school shooting attacks? Those ideas to perpetuate school shootings are obviously bad ideas. Why should we expect anyone to act quote-unquote right when we teach them there's no such thing as right? That what's right for you might be wrong for me, but if it's right for you, that's really all that matters. False ideas about truth can lead to false ideas about life. In many cases, these false ideas give apparent justification for what amounts to immoral behavior. If the concept of truth can be killed, then the concept of any true religion or any true morality can be killed with it. So then to further explain the Roadrunner tactic or further illustrate it, they're going to show this example of a conversation that Norm Geisler had with somebody named Don. And Norm introduces himself, and then Don introduces himself, and Norm says, "Do you mind if we ask you a spiritual question?" Don says, "No, go ahead." Norm says, "Don, if you were to die tonight, stand before God, and God were to ask you, 'Why should I let you into my heaven?' what would you say?" Don says, "I'd say to God, 'Why shouldn't you let me into heaven? Because I'm an atheist, it won't happen that way.'" Norm says, "You're absolutely certain there's no God?" Don says, "Well, no, I'm not absolutely certain. I guess it's possible there might be a God." Norm says, "So then, Don, you're actually not an atheist, you're an agnostic, since an atheist says there is no God, while an agnostic says, 'I don't know whether there is a God.'" Don says, "Okay, then I'm an agnostic." Norm says, "So, Don, what kind of an agnostic are you?" Don says, "I don't have any clue. You just informed me I was an agnostic. I didn't know there were multiple types." Norm says, "Well, Don, there are actually two kinds of agnostics. An ordinary agnostic says he doesn't know anything for sure. An ornery agnostic says he can't know anything for sure." Don says, I'm the ornery kind that can't know anything for sure." Norm says, "Well, Don, if you're that kind of agnostic that can't know anything for sure, then how can you know for sure what type of agnostic you are? What type of agnostic you are? How do you know, Don, that you can't know anything for sure?" Don says, "Okay, I guess I must be an ordinary agnostic instead of an ornery agnostic." Norm says, since you now admit you can know whether or not God exists, why don't you know that God exists?" Don says, "Because nobody's shown me evidence." Norm says, would you be willing to look at evidence?" Well, the story goes on that Don looked at the evidence and eventually became a Christian. He looked at a book by Frank Morrison called "Who Moved the Stone?" And in previous videos on this very channel, we went through the evidence for the resurrection and in the new evidence that demands a verdict. And the chapter on the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus in the new evidence that demands a verdict quotes that book, "Who Moved the Stone?" on multiple occasions.